Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
Now I know how you feel. I can see her feet on the cold, glossy floor of that hotel room. Bare, slightly trembling at the ankles. The rest of her, clothes half unbuttoned, hair tousled, comes into focus slowly, as if I'm squinting through smoke. But it's her feet that strike me first, because there's something so vulnerable about toes pressing into a floor that is not our home. Her red coat, my anniversary gift, lies bunched up near the bed like discarded evidence. And right there, by the pale glow of the bedside lamp, stands the man who slid his hand around her waist in that photo I saw in the newspaper. Michael Sanders, Businessman of the Year. And apparently, her new muse. I step into the room. Silence, except for the quiet hum of the hotel's air conditioning. I'm holding a half-breath, wondering if they even see me, if they can feel the static of my presence. My ears are buzzing, like a radio catching interference. She turns her head, blinking in shock. He stiffens, stands taller, but says nothing. He might want to bark a question at me, threaten me even, but for some reason, he can't. Or maybe he senses I'm beyond normal conversation. I don't say anything at first, because words are too heavy. Because inside, I'm caught between some unstoppable avalanche of rage and a numb, distant calm that I've forced upon myself. Her eyes flick to me, then to him, then back to me. She's searching for a lifeline, an explanation, but I don't need an explanation anymore. I've already seen the newspaper article. Margaret in that red coat, her hand resting lightly on his chest, his fingers splayed across her lower back. The caption, Michael Sanders, Businessman of the Year, and his new muse. All I needed was that photograph to push me over the edge. And yet here I am, standing in the same room with them, my heart pounding so hard it might just break my ribs. She speaks first. Long, rambling words tumble out of her mouth. John, listen, this isn't. Let me explain. We were just. It's complicated. It's not what it looks like. I swear. The syllables overflow, each one more desperate than the last. She's wearing a blouse hastily buttoned, a skirt twisted around her hips. Her bare feet shuffle across the floor, as if she's trying to inch her way to me without being threatening. As if she's hoping a gesture of contrition will fix anything. I still say nothing. I give a slight tilt of my head and exhale. Finally, I manage one word. Why? She tries to respond, but it's another wave of tangled excuses. My mind drifts away from what she's saying. Michael stands there, arms crossed, jaw clenched, as if deciding whether to confront me, apologize, or vanish. The tension in his shoulders belies a man who is used to winning, to dominating a room. But this room belongs to me now, if only for these few excruciating minutes. I feel a prickle behind my eyes, a strange dryness. My mouth tastes like copper, and my voice is low when I say, "You're wearing the coat I gave you for our 20th anniversary. At least, you were wearing it before it ended up on the floor. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" She doesn't meet my gaze, and in that moment, every memory, every holiday dinner, every quiet Sunday morning, every shared dream, collapses into a single point of hollow space. My chest feels tight, a twisting ache that might be heartbreak or something worse. I almost laugh. A black, bitter laugh that tries to force its way out of my throat. I glance at Michael. He meets my stare, tries to speak. "John, is it?" "Don't," I say, cutting him off with a flat, empty tone. My body is trembling, but I keep my words steady. He closes his mouth, his lips forming a tense line. Margaret moves closer, stepping on the edge of that red coat. My coat, my gift, my trust. "John, please, let me." My breath snags in my throat. I don't want this conversation to go on any longer than it has to. I just want to walk out, to pinch myself awake from this living nightmare. But something raw inside me demands that I stay, that I soak in every detail, because I want this hurt. I want to feel it so thoroughly that I have no choice but to transform it into something else. Maybe vengeance. Maybe freedom. She continues, softly now. John, I felt so distant from you. You're always working, always burying yourself in numbers and spreadsheets, and Stop, I say, raising my hand just slightly. The motion seems to echo in the hush. She falls silent, tears pooling in her eyes, but she doesn't look away this time. I stare back, an emptiness in my chest. I don't want to hear it right now. I close my eyes for a second. I can almost see images of us in the early days, laughing in a cramped apartment, holding each other close after cheap dinners, drifting to sleep in each other's arms when the future was just a bright swirl of possibilities. Now, those memories feel like they belong to someone else's story, or maybe to two people who died long ago and left only our hollow shells behind. When I open my eyes, Michael has moved a fraction of an inch closer to Margaret, as though instinctively protecting her. The sight stirs a flicker of black humor in me. He thinks he's her champion. Maybe step back, I say to him, a quiet tension edging my voice. He exhales, nods almost imperceptibly, and steps away. He tries to speak, probably to show that he's the kind of man who confronts problems head-on. But he catches something in my face that makes him hesitate. He swallows, presses his lips together. Good. I look at her one last time. Get dressed, I say. Then I turn on my heel, walk out of that room, and let the door click shut behind me. In the hallway, I lean against the wall and close my eyes again. Damn, I whisper. The word tastes foul. I want to laugh, or cry, or punch the wall. Instead, I just stand there, pressed against the cold plaster, fists clenched. I hate how my body is shaking. There's a moment. An image flashes in my mind of her feet, bare, trembling on that cheap hotel floor. It's an image that will haunt me for a long time. Because it's not just the feet. It's the entire betrayal they represent. I remember how it all started, how I found out. I was sitting on a park bench, a newspaper open on my lap, sipping black coffee from a thermos. The day was unremarkable, a drizzle threatening to fall from gray Seattle clouds. I nearly passed right over the article until my eyes caught her name. Michael Sanders, Businessman of the Year, and his new muse, Margaret. The small black and white photo struck me like a lead pipe to the gut. There she was, my wife, draped in that unmistakable red coat I'd bought her for our 20th wedding anniversary. She was pressed close to this Michael, smiling, their bodies connected by an intimacy I recognized all too well. His hand rested on her waist, the kind of gesture I'd done so many times before. I stared at the photo, wanting to tear it from the page, tear it from reality. My face twisted in a grimace so profound I felt the muscles in my jaw cramp. People in the park walked by, oblivious. I should have ranted, maybe screamed. But I said nothing. I just sat there, coffee going cold, heart hammering in my ribcage like a cornered animal. It felt like the air had thickened, wrapping around my lungs so I couldn't draw a proper breath. Eventually, I stood up, folded the newspaper, and walked home. In my head, a plan was already forming. A dark little plan that gave me a warped sense of calm. Like if I could orchestrate a scenario that turned their secret into public shame, I might wrestle back some control of my life. I had no illusions that it would fix my marriage. But the thought of them facing me on my own terms, it was the only thread I could cling to. The next day, I acted. I called Michael Sanders myself, using the number from his business website. I disguised my voice, told him I was with a renovation company he might have heard of, told him that Margaret had expressed interest in surprising her husband by remodeling the kitchen. Could he come meet me at our home to discuss details? He sounded wary at first, but maybe the promise of some expensive project appealed to him. Or maybe he was just curious. Either way, he agreed to come by the next evening. I made sure Margaret would arrive shortly after. I sent her a casual text. Honey, I'm trying to do something nice for us. remodel the kitchen. Could you come home early and bring some takeout for dinner? She replied with a cheerful, sure. So, as if everything were perfectly normal. Inside, I was seething. But I kept it locked down, forcing myself to move in a haze of methodical calm. I put on a shirt and tie, as if preparing for a business meeting. I even offered myself a twisted little grin in the mirror, testing out my good host face. Damn, I muttered, realizing I looked more like a funeral director than a homeowner planning a kitchen remodel. When Michael arrived, he was impeccably dressed, as if expecting to impress a potential client. He carried a sleek leather folio under one arm, ready to scribble down ideas or show off a portfolio, I guess. I greeted him politely, welcomed him inside. We talked in that stilted, polite tone people use when they're not sure if they're about to land a deal or walk into a trap. Then the door opened behind us. I knew it was Margaret, bearing bags of takeout. I turned and smiled stiffly. Hey, honey, I managed. I want you to meet Mr. Sanders. He's here to talk about our kitchen. My stomach churned at my own words. It was a lethal kind of theater, and I could sense her shock the moment she realized who she was seeing. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her cheeks. She tried to speak, but a panicked hush fell over the house. Michael cleared his throat, shooting her a look. She gave a tiny shake of her head, as if to beg him to stay quiet. Maybe they both saw the storm in my eyes. Maybe they heard it in the silence. I closed the door, deliberately slow. Click. The lock slid into place. Damn things sometimes get stuck, I said softly, my voice almost friendly. Let me fix it. But I did nothing about the jam block. Instead, I locked it from inside, one swift motion with the deadbolt. Margaret took a breath, panic shimmering in her eyes. John, can we? Let's talk in the living room, I said, still that eerie calm. My heart was pounding, but outwardly I was doing my best impression of a gracious host. We walked in, the three of us. She set the takeout bags on the coffee table, hands shaking. Michael looked like he wanted to say something but was waiting for the right moment. Sit. I gestured at the couch, flicking my gaze at Michael. He hesitated, then sat, forcing a polite smile. John, maybe we should keep this professional, he began, but I cut him off with a single shake of my head. I turned to Margaret. You too, I said. She sank onto the couch next to him, but not too close. A bead of sweat crept down her temple. I could almost smell her guilt, and I hated how a part of me still found her beautiful in that moment, even knowing she was another man's muse. What exactly is happening, John? She asked, voice tight. I managed a half smile. I told you. It's about a kitchen remodel. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Michael looked from her to me, eyes flicking with alarm. My voice lowered. Thing is, I said, stepping around the couch, I might have a different plan for how to handle this. I yanked out my phone and dialed the local precinct. My pulse hammered so loudly that the ringing in my ears nearly drowned out the tone on the call. Officer, I said when the line picked up. I have a situation at my home. Feels like an invasion of my privacy. I gave the address, ignoring Margaret's and Michael's stunned faces. What are you doing? Margaret exclaimed, leaning forward as if to grab my phone. I stepped back, raising a brow. I think these people. I motioned toward them. Air trespassing. Breaking into my private life. Isn't that right? My voice was almost a snarl. Michael half stood, but I held up a hand. Don't. The dispatcher on the other end asked a question, but I just repeated, yes, please send someone right away. And I hung up. Margaret jumped from the couch, eyes wide with fear. John, are you out of your mind? You can't. She looked at Michael, who seemed equally at a loss. The powerful businessman, helpless in this moment. I felt a flicker of savage triumph in my gut, an ugly black flame warming me from inside. I moved to the doorway, leaning against it with my arms crossed. We're going to wait here, I said. until the police arrive. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air was thick with tension, like we were all suffocating on it. Then I gave a thin smile. I believe you two have some explaining to do. The next 10 minutes dragged on in a suffocating silence broken only by Margaret's shaky attempts at logic. John, please, this is insane. Think about what you're doing. You don't want the neighbors seeing. Oh, I think they'd love the show, I said, letting a hint of twisted humor seep into my tone. Maybe they'll stream it online. And ironically, that's exactly what happened. We heard some commotion outside. Someone must have noticed the arrival of the police cars, so they took out their phone cameras. Michael tried to reason with me. John, this will get messy. Let's keep it private. Whatever you think, Margaret, and I did. I cut him off with a glare. I know exactly what you did, I muttered. I'm sure half the city knows too. Thanks to your little photo shoot in the paper. Margaret tried to place a hand on my arm, her eyes brimming with tears. It was a mistake, John. I'm sorry, Too late, I said, the words tasting bitter. I pulled away from her touch. I wanted to hear that a long time ago. When the knock came at the door, I opened it to the police. I gave them a sardonic grin. Officers, I believe these two are intruding in my private life. I stepped outside, letting them handle the confusion. The officers looked from me to Margaret, to Michael, both stammering feeble explanations. Flashbulbs from the neighbor's phone or camera flickered through the doorway. I could almost hear someone comment, "That's the businessman from the newspapers." I stepped out onto the sidewalk, lighting a cigarette with trembling hands. I don't even smoke regularly, but it felt like I needed something, anything, to keep from exploding. Neighbors watched from windows, cameras rolling. Jesus, I whispered under my breath. Damn it all. My laughter was hollow, scraping against the inside of my throat. Eventually, the police escorted Margaret and Michael outside. They didn't cuff them or anything. They just had them leave the premises. But the public shame, the swirling camera flashes, it was enough to let me taste a momentary satisfaction. I met Michael's gaze over the heads of the small, gathering crowd. He looked furious. Not at me, but at the spectacle. Margaret looked crushed, humiliated, tears spilling down her face. Part of me wanted to hold her, to wipe away those tears. Another part wanted to spit at her feet. The only thing I did was blow out a lungful of smoke into the damp Seattle air and watch them go. I sold everything after that. The house, the cars, even the boat I'd worked years to afford. I couldn't live with the memories soaked into those walls. The ghost of our marriage clung to every surface. So I packed up, arranged for a quick sale, and left. After paying off what needed to be paid off, I found myself with some money and an apartment that was little more than 4 walls and a bed. But the emptiness wasn't a burden. It was clarifying. In the weeks that followed, the newspapers and local gossip channels had a field day with the story. Scandal rocks local businessman's personal life, or police called to shocking confrontation at private home. I read them with a smirk, feeling that black humor swirl through my veins. What more could they say? The illusions had shattered, no sense gluing them back together. Margaret tried to call me, tried to text me, left voicemails that started with, "John, I just want to talk," and ended in sobs or breathless apologies. I listened to exactly one of them, then deleted the rest. I didn't want her words. Not anymore. I'd said my piece at the door that day. The rest was up to lawyers and time. Michael Sanders, for his part, had the resources to spin the narrative publicly. He hired a PR firm, presumably to handle the fallout of the incident. For a while, I was bitter he'd get away with it. That was until I realized I no longer cared. My revenge had already been exacted in front of my own house, in front of cameras. The humiliation had been mutual, symmetrical. Sure, he might climb his way back up the social ladder, throw money at the scandal until it vanished. But I knew, deep in my bones, that he'd never wash off the stain completely. And if Margaret stayed with him after that, Well, she could have him. One night, in my new, sparsely furnished apartment, I stood at the window with a glass of whiskey. The city lights were blurred by drizzle, the neon signs glowing in watery reflections on the pavement below. There was something about the hush, the emptiness, that felt right. I thought, this is how a man truly starts over. Alone. Freed from illusions. Freed from lies. For a moment, I remembered how Margaret's feet looked on that hotel carpet. The red coat tossed aside, the hush of her voice. That memory stung my brain like a hornet. And yet, weirdly enough, it also felt like relief. I'd walked straight into the darkest, most humiliating moment of my life. I come out the other side, changed. I was still bruised, still angry, but the rage had begun to mellow into something else. Resolve, maybe. A desire to keep going until I found a version of myself that didn't revolve around her or the betrayal. I knocked back the whiskey in one gulp. It burned down my throat. A wave of black humor hit me, and I laughed in the empty apartment. Revenge is not retribution, I muttered, hearing the echo of my own voice. It's liberation. And damn if that wasn't the truth. I'd wanted to punish her, punish him. Maybe I did, but the real gift I gave myself was that moment of public confrontation, the scorching honesty that burned away the last illusions. No more secrets, no more shame. Just me, standing on my own 2 feet, like her feet had stood in that hotel, only I'm not trembling. I'm not undone. They say time heals all wounds. I think that's nonsense. Time dulls the edges, maybe. Time helps you push the pain down so it becomes just another layer in the sediment of your life. But the wound itself, what caused it, can remain as a scar on your soul, a constant reminder. And in a way, I'm grateful for that scar. It's the place where my illusions died, where reality set me free. In the months after I sold the house, I drifted into a new routine. Woke up alone, made coffee alone, rode the bus to the office alone. People at work tiptoed around me at first, like I was a walking landmine. I kept my head down, did my job, tried not to let their pity weigh on me. Eventually, the rumor mill quieted. The scandal was old news, replaced by something else. That's how it goes. Someone else's drama overshadowing yours. Lawyers handled the divorce paperwork. Margaret wanted to talk, to see if we could salvage anything. I still love you, John, she wrote once in a handwritten letter that arrived unexpectedly at my apartment. I read it, felt that old ache in my chest, and then tore it to pieces. Love, I thought. That's not what love looks like. One afternoon, I visited the coffee shop across from my old corporate building. I glanced at the corner table Margaret, and I used to share on Sundays. The memory threatened to surface, her laughter, her warm hand on mine, and that red coat draped over the back of a chair. I forced the memory down. Instead, I let a small, rueful grin tug at my lips, took my coffee to go, and walked outside. A homeless man was sitting on the sidewalk, shoulders hunched against the chill. He rattled a paper cup at me. I paused. Usually, I'd toss a bit of change or mumble an apology. This time, I asked, "You hungry?" He nodded, a look of mild disbelief crossing his face. So I stepped back into the coffee shop, ordered a hot sandwich, some soup, and brought it out to him. He mumbled thanks, his eyes wide with gratitude. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple moment of humanity I hadn't bothered with before. But something about it cleared the static in my head. I walked away feeling lighter. That's what liberation started to look like. Tiny acts of kindness to strangers. New habits that had nothing to do with the life I used to share with Margaret. The apartment I called home was small, a bit shabby around the edges, but it was mine. No echoes of betrayal in its walls. Just new beginnings. Of course, the nightmares still came sometimes. I'd jolt awake, cold sweat on my forehead, the image of her bare feet on that hotel floor still etched behind my eyelids. I'd steady my breathing, remind myself that it was done, that I had faced it, that it was no longer a secret strangling me from within. and I'd drift back into a restless sleep, unsure if I felt more rage or relief. Weeks bowled into months, and then half a year. One day, I got a call from a friend who had stumbled upon a new job opportunity. "They need someone with your expertise, John," he said. "And the pay's good. Might be nice to have a change of scene." I considered it, felt a small spark of interest. Maybe a fresh environment, new city, new coworkers. Maybe that was part of the next step. So I interviewed, got the offer, and prepared to pack up again. This time, though, the move felt like a choice rather than a retreat, a chance to shape my own life with no baggage. I found a place near a small lake, a quieter neighborhood. The job was in auditing, something I was good at, though I told them up front I'd rather avoid a managerial role. I was done trying to climb a corporate ladder. I wanted my days to be straightforward, no illusions. They accepted. I accepted. On a drizzly afternoon, I locked up my old apartment for the last time. I put the key in the landlord's drop box and looked at the battered door, remembering how many nights I'd spent slumped behind it, staring at the darkness, chain-smoking my frustration away. A wave of gratitude rose in me. Strange, I thought, to be grateful for such a low place in my life. But that place had let me break free. I chuckled under my breath, a low, sardonic sound. "Thanks for everything," I murmured to the door. Then I walked away, duffel bag over my shoulder, heading into whatever was next. The new city had a different rhythm, quieter, more open skies. I rented a small house with a plain white fence and a cracked walkway. And you know what? I liked it. The day I moved in, I walked through each empty room, feeling a calm hush in the plaster and floorboards. No ghosts, no echoes. I could live here with just myself. That evening, I drove a few miles to a local diner for dinner, a place with checkered floors and a neon sign that flickered. I sat at the counter, sipping black coffee, scanning the menu. An older couple on my right was chatting about their garden, how the tomatoes needed more sunlight. On my left, a pair of teenage boys were laughing about some app or game. For the first time in months, I felt like an observer in the normal flow of human life, like I wasn't singled out by shame or betrayal. Just a man, ordering a hamburger in a small-town diner. I got lost in my thoughts, barely tasting the fries. My mind flicked through memories unspooling in slow motion. Margaret's tears, Michael's smug face, the policeman's flashlight, neighbors filming us. And then, with a faint smile, I remembered that final flash of cameras as they left my house, humiliated. That was the moment I realized I'd done it. I'd reclaimed something. Not my marriage, not my illusions of love, but maybe my self-respect. Even if it was fueled by bitterness, it was still mine. "Refill." The waitress's voice broke into my thoughts. I blinked and nodded. She poured more coffee with a polite smile, took my half-eaten plate away. "You okay, hon? Looks like you got something big on your mind." Her tone was gentle, maternal, but not intrusive. I hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "Just starting over," I said softly. She nodded like she understood. "Well," she said, "that can be a blessing." Then she turned away to tend another table. I stared at the swirl of steam rising from the coffee cup. Starting over can be a blessing. Maybe she was right. Work was straightforward. Auditing, crunching numbers, analyzing data for the new company. It was a different environment, less glamorous, more small town. People were friendly but not nosy. I came in, did my job, left. I found a small gym nearby, started lifting weights a couple times a week. My body ached, but it was a good ache, something to anchor me in the present, in the tangible. Sometimes, I'd catch a fleeting memory of Margaret. Part of me still missed the person she once was, or the person I thought she was. But I'd push the memory down, determined not to drown in regret. Because if there's one thing I learned, it's that illusions are more dangerous than reality could ever be. A few months into my new life, I began hearing about Michael Sanders again. Some magazine cover touting his philanthropic efforts. A coworker showed me the article. Businessman of the Year invests in local charities. I suppressed a sarcastic grin, thanked them, and handed the magazine back. It was odd how little I cared. Maybe the old me would have raged at the unfairness of it all. Now, I just felt an almost comedic detachment. Good luck, I thought. Because deep down, I knew any philanthropic gesture he made was just part of his PR spree. But that was his life to live, not mine. One rainy Saturday, I woke up early, threw on an old pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, and decided to explore the local flea market. The drizzle had kept most people away, so the aisles were fairly empty. I wandered, sipping from a paper cup of coffee, glancing at the tables of trinkets and antiques. At some point, I noticed a battered radio that looked older than me. I picked it up, fiddled with the knobs. The vendor said, $5, so I handed over the cash. I brought the radio home, set it on the kitchen counter, and plugged it in. The crackle of static reminded me of the dull roar that had filled my head the day I first discovered the affair. But I turned the dial, and a random country station hummed to life. A voice crooned about heartbreak and regrets. I let the lyrics wash over me. It was oddly comforting. That's when I realized the ache in my chest had softened. I still felt a shadow of the old betrayal, but it no longer dominated my every thought. I wasn't actively planning any more revenge, any new humiliations. It was done. I'd had my payback. And in the end, it was less about punishing them and more about cutting myself free from their power. It made me think. Maybe revenge is a dirty business, but there's a reason we crave it. We think it'll restore balance or ease the pain. The truth is, the real victory is in letting go. By exposing them, by making them face the public eye, I'd purged the darkest part of my anger. And though it didn't bring me happiness, it brought me closure. Enough to start over. I found myself smiling at the song on the old radio. That slow, aching twang of a steel guitar, the singer lamenting a woman who left him for a friend. My black humor flared, and I chuckled. I get it, buddy, I murmured to the radio. But trust me, you'll live. Might even find freedom on the other side. The following week, I got an unexpected call from my ex-wife's lawyer. Mr. Evans, the voice said carefully, we're finalizing the last details of the divorce settlement. Margaret wants you to know she's sorry. The lawyer paused, perhaps expecting a response. All right, I said. I didn't elaborate. She also asked if you'd consider speaking with her. The lawyer continued. Just to find some mutual closure. My lips twisted into a dry smirk. Tell her I appreciate the gesture, but I'm past it. The settlement is closure enough. I heard a quiet sigh on the other end. Understood, she said. And that was that. When the call ended, I stood in my living room for a moment, absorbing the hush. Then I exhaled, raking my fingers through my hair. I felt an odd sense of relief, as if I'd closed the final page of a book I never wanted to read again. Time moved along in that steady, unremarkable way life does when big dramas have subsided. I spent my days working, my evenings reading or strolling around the lake near my house. Sometimes I'd sit on a bench and watch ducks paddle across the water. Old men in hats would fish from the shore, occasionally tipping their caps at me. Once or twice, a neighbor recognized me from around town. We'd make small talk about the weather, the local sports teams. I found it refreshing how they didn't pry into my personal history. One crisp afternoon, as I walked along the lake, I noticed a stray dog limping near the reeds. I crouched and whistled softly, coaxing it over. Its fur was matted, its paws muddy, but it wagged its tail, hobbling close enough to sniff my hand. I gently patted its head, and it looked up with those sad, trusting eyes dogs always seem to have. I made a decision right then. Come on, I said softly, standing up. Let's get you some help. I took the dog to a nearby vet, paid for some basic care, found out it was malnourished but otherwise salvageable. Then I brought it home. Bought some dog food, an old blanket from a thrift store, Over the next few weeks, I found myself caring for this scruffy creature with a sense of responsibility I hadn't felt in ages. Watching her limp turn into a steady trot, seeing her tail wag a bit higher each day, it was like a reminder that healing is possible, that scars don't define you unless you let them. I named her Bailey, and soon enough, she was following me around the house, curling up at my feet in the evenings while I watched the news or listened to that old radio. Sometimes, I'd talk to her, just random musings about life. She'd tilt her head, as if she understood. I realized I was changing too. Less consumed by bitterness, more open to small joys, a wagging tail, a quiet walk by the lake, a good cup of coffee in the morning. This was my new normal, and for once it felt good. One dreary evening after a long day at work, I sat at the kitchen table, going through a box of old photos I'd recently retrieved from storage. They spanned decades. Images of my parents, siblings, some college pals, even Margaret in her 20s, smiling at me from across a table in some long-forgotten diner. I studied that picture for a while. Her smile was so bright, her eyes so full of promise. My chest tightened, but I didn't break. Because I knew that version of her was gone. Maybe it had never existed quite the way I remembered. People change, or we never really see them clearly until something shatters. I set the photo aside, rummaging deeper. Found a shot of me holding a fish I'd caught on my father's old boat, grinning like a fool. Another shot of me at my college graduation, hugging a buddy who'd since moved away. So many fragments of time, each representing a life I used to know. Bailey nuzzled my leg, as if sensing my mood. I rubbed her ears gently and gazed at the pictures spread across the table. The life I had, the life I thought I had, and the life I was building now. We don't get do-overs, I told her quietly, but we can make something new. She wagged her tail, and I felt a flicker of warmth. Not long after, I finalized the last legal steps to sever ties with Margaret. Paperwork soared back and forth. The ink dried on the dotted line. We were done. Sometimes I wondered if she was still with Michael, if their little romance burned out or exploded into something else. I wouldn't know, and honestly, I didn't care to find out. There was a day, though, when I glanced at the local news and saw a headline about him hosting a charity gala. A photo showed him in a sleek tuxedo, a radiant woman on his arm. Not Margaret. For a second, my stomach clenched. Then I realized I felt nothing. No spark of jealousy, no pang of regret, just a faint cynicism that made me smirk. His life would keep spinning. My life would keep spinning. Two parallel lines that no longer touched. One sunny Saturday, I took Bailey out to the lake. The air was crisp, a light breeze rustling the leaves. We walked along the water's edge, me in my old jeans and sweatshirt, her tail swishing behind her. At one point, she barked at a group of ducks, then glanced back at me for approval. I laughed, the sound echoing across the ripples. It was the first time in forever that my laughter wasn't tinged with bitterness. I found a bench and sat down, letting Bailey sniff around. The sunlight glimmered on the water. My mind wandered to the day I discovered Margaret's affair. How I'd felt like I was drowning, gasping for an emotional foothold. I recalled the humiliation, the rage, the plan for revenge. The slow, brutal confrontation that had ended with cameras flashing outside my home. And here I was now, breathing, living. I wasn't the same man. I'd lost so much, but I'd also gained a strange, steady clarity. No illusions, no half-truths. Just me and the reality I'd carved out. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the sun warm my face. In my head, I heard the faint echo of that first line from months ago. Teper, I znаю, čo ty čувствуешь. Now I know what you feel. Only, I wasn't sure who I was speaking to anymore. Margaret? Michael? Myself. In some strange way, I understood the universal pain we all carry. The fear of betrayal, the fear of being alone, the fear of not measuring up. I'd stepped into the darkest corner of that fear, lived with it, and found my way out. Maybe that's what real liberation is, not the fleeting satisfaction of revenge, but the raw acceptance that even if you lose everything, you can still stand. And eventually, you learn to walk again, possibly even run. A breeze stirred the surface of the lake, sending ripples dancing. Bailey barked at a passing jogger, tail wagging high. I gave her a gentle pat, then stood up. "Let's go," I said, pulling my jacket tighter. "We've got a life to live." She trotted beside me, and as we headed home, I felt the corners of my mouth lift into a quiet smile. It wasn't a triumphant grin or a smirk of bitterness. It was something else entirely. Call it peace, or maybe acceptance. That intangible sense that, though my story had nearly destroyed me, it had also unlocked a part of me I never knew existed. And for the first time, I walked forward without feeling the weight of everything I'd lost. In the end, it was never about punishing them. It was about setting myself free. That is the only closure I ever really needed. And if there's a taste left in my mouth now, it's a little bittersweet, but honest. Almost like black coffee on a cold day, harsh at first sip, but warming once it settles. If I have any final words for Margaret, for Michael, for anyone who ever played a role in that painful drama, they'd be these. I'm here. I'm alive. And I'm not trembling anymore.